You're listening to Inside Content, the TV industry podcast. This show is brought to you by 3Vision, a global TV industry consultancy specialising in content acquisition, strategy, research and business development. Each episode, we give you VIP access to the views and experiences of senior TV executives and discuss the latest TV industry trends and insights.
Hello and welcome to Inside Content. I'm Jack Davison, EVP at 3Vision, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Natasha Matos-Hemingway, Group Chief Commercial, Marketing and Product Officer at Shahid, to discuss their activity in MENA. We talk about balancing a digital proposition featuring AVOD, FAST and SVOD, innovation in the streaming space, how original content can cut through the noise and attract new subs, and FAST in MENA. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's podcast. As I always say, I think I've said it before, it's great to take a little time out in my day to stop and talk to someone about what they've been up to and to talk about some of the issues of today. Today, I'm really lucky to be joined by Natasha Matos-Hemingway from Shahid. Now, Natasha, if I get this correct, but I'll bring Natasha in a second, is Group Chief Commercial, Marketing and Product Officer for Shahid. Which is effectively, I think, the leader. So effectively, you're the leader of the VOD business at the NBC Group. Many of you will be familiar with NBC, one of the leading media and entertainment companies in the Middle East and North Africa. Main business segments I'll have a go at, but I won't do them all. It's obviously broadcast channel business, the streaming services, production through NBC Studios, radio, and various other media interests. But that's enough of me having a go at it. I will say hello to Natasha, and perhaps, Natasha, you could start by telling the listeners about your role at the company.
Perfect. Thank you, Jack. And you did get it right. So well done. We have quite a few businesses to our name. And of course, NBC has been in business for 30 years. We're the leading media company in the Middle East. And I've got the pleasure of leading Shahid, which is the streamer attached to NBC business. We are the number one streamer in the Middle East, which is something that we're extremely proud of. I've joined the company about 3 years ago, and I look after essentially all the kind of commercial activities that allow us to grow. So everything from the go-to-market strategy, the commercial partnerships, marketing, to product and everything else in between. And so really my focus is I've got quite a big team, which I really love working with, and really focus on, understanding the audiences, making sure that, our pricing, our content plan, our marketing campaigns, our customer support, the way users are interacting with our platform, all of that makes sense, so that we are continuously delighting our users and our subscribers, and therefore, maintaining our lead in terms of being the number one streamer in the region.
That's great. That's a great intro. I mean, let's get straight into the Shahid business. I mean, yes, you're the number one. Well, you're the number one Arabic VOD streamer, I guess, globally as well. But what's more interesting to me is that you're the number one at home, and domestically, you're one of the very few kind of regional or domestic, for that matter, champions when it comes to beating Netflix. So, in my book, as an observer, I love that, because that makes it really interesting, and also you must be doing something right. I read in your corporate report, I think they talked about revenue increases in 2023 of kind of 6-ish%. But what I read was it was described as being driven by Shahid growth. I think was one of the lines I read. So perhaps we could talk a bit about the business and how it has grown into the business that it is today.
Yeah, happy to do that. We are bigger than Netflix. It's always a reference point that I suppose people ask me about. I do like to remind my boss that happened a few months after I joined, and we've just been widening the gap, so it's a good one for me personally. Let me tell you a bit about Shahid and the business that we run. So We launched Shahid back in 2009, and it was really launched as a platform to serve a catch-up service for TV. So the idea was obviously the TV audiences would want to catch up on certain episodes of TV content, and they'd come onto Shahid. And it was an extension, essentially, of the advertising business that we were running. And that, continued to grow for a number of years and did really well. And then we started to see the shift in the market. There was a lot of streamers starting to come, globally, but also come into our region. And so we made the decision in 2020 to relaunch the brand, relaunch the platform, redo the content strategy. And that really allowed us to start this kind of behavior towards, paying for content and driving the concept of an SVOD service in the region. This, of course, was done in January of 2020. And, it goes without saying that also, somehow was coincided, and obviously not planned, but we had the pandemic kind of hit globally and certainly the region a few months after that. And so that really helped drive that kind of first wave of growth. And we did a great job of moving a lot of the SVOD users the AVOD users onto the SVOD side of the business. And that was kind of the first kind of a big push for growth on the SVOD side that we saw. Obviously, growth is not always linear. And so that was kind of like the first kind of big push. And then in the last few years, we've really started to look again at, does our go-to-market make sense? Does our content proposition make sense? How do we refine that? How do we make sure that we're continuously improving the user experience? And so over the last 3 years, a lot of effort has been into kind of really narrowing down where we're going to be driving growth. How does it, how does our go-to-market make sense? How do we make sure that the user experience is as best as it can be? So that really allowed us to carry on and then drive another kind of bubble of growth on the SVOD side. And then in 2023, so last year, we also, again, we're always monitoring the market, advertising revenue. There's obviously been a lot of growth in terms of advertising revenue shifting to digital, and with advertising revenue in general, recovering post-pandemic. And so what we decided was, the AVOD business was always kind of running, but we really wanted to give that a good push. We were confident that the SVOD strategy was working, and so it was the right time for us to relaunch AVOD. And so we did that in January of last year, 2023. And again, the same kind of thinking, right? So we relooked at our content strategy, we improved the user experience, we actually shifted 85% of our content that was behind the paywall to AVOD. And we've seen phenomenal growth come from the AVOD side as well. So we're really in a privileged position, I would say almost globally, Jack, where we are, a streamer that is able to drive really good growth on the AVOD side and really good growth also on the SVOD side. And so that's something that particularly, towards the end of last year and this year that we've really been focusing on. And so far we're doing, I think, really good.
I think that you've really kind of hit kind of one of the fascinating areas, especially for kind of bigger media groups like your own. I think there aren't many that can talk about basically kind of making all of those areas work well together. I don't mind saying that I think kind of ITV over here in the UK, yes, it has an SVOD service, but in the UK, I think it's very marginalized compared to the kind of the AVOD service, which is sort of shown in how they schedule their content. I guess it would be good to talk a bit about how those services relate to each other. I think you've kind of mentioned it a bit, really moving some of the content from behind the SVOD wall to the AVOD wall, but perhaps kind of that makes sense for AVOD, but what does it mean for SVOD? Does that kind of create more of a problem for SVOD? I guess, how do those services relate to each other? I mean, I kind of tried to do my homework, looked at your report. Yeah, your AVOD active users were up massively in 2023. I think your report said 25%. Your digital advertising revenue kind of more than doubled. Your kind of content kind of increased. But at the same time, your SVOD subs hit about 4 million, which was up 40% year on year. And you've launched some fast channels as well. So how do you, is it kind of a perpetual kind of strategic balance between the kind of those services?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I probably make it sound easy, but it's by far not that. And yes, you were right. I didn't mention fast. But we were the first streamer to launch FAST in 2022, and that obviously cuts across AVOD and SVOD. All users are able to leverage that, and that's been a continuous kind of learning and refining and making sure that users are getting the best benefit of that piece as well. But to your question around, so I've certainly observed that often. I think I try and look for comparisons and who is doing something similar, and I think in general, either a service kind of favors more the AVOD side or the SVOD side. So far, we've been able to do really well at both. And I think that one of the main reasons is, first of all, there's a lot of diversity in our region. We are a pan-Arab player, and of course, we have international subscribers as well. But within our region, there's audiences that do prefer, now that we've educated the market, they do prefer a paid service where they don't have advertising. They've got greater control, and then of course there are, particularly in regions where pricing becomes a bit more challenging, and so AVOD makes a whole lot of sense there because users can still get access to our great content that is then obviously supported by ads. And it's important for us to be able to offer those two, because ultimately we want to give users the choice that makes the most sense for their needs and for their lifestyle. One of the big differentiators that we have been able to use in terms of the content mix is to make sure that while a lot of our content and most of our content is available on AVOD, we do keep certain categories behind the paywall to still make sense to drive upsell onto SVOD. And so things like our Shahid originals, our sports, and our kids proposition are placed behind the paywall. And so we do see that there's kind of like, I like to explain it as three kind of audiences. So you have the audience that may or may not be linked to TV. Often they are, and they'll come onto AVOD and do catch up and kind of just stay in the AVOD space. There is a portion of that we're able to upsell quite successfully based on the content that is behind the paywall. And so we use AVOD not only as a way to generate advertising revenue, but also very much to drive upsell to SVOD. And then there's a bunch of users that come straight onto SVOD because they like the whole proposition, and they've been attracted by an original, for example, and so they come through and they subscribe straight away. So that's kind of our focus. We work very closely with our colleagues in TV to make sure that we always, and in the content team and with studios, to make sure that, we're continuously refining our strategy and reacting to how the audiences are reacting to our strategy, so that we, try and carry on making it look as simple as we try and make it look, even though it's a complicated piece.
Yeah, it is complicated. I mean, you touched there on kind of what my next kind of thoughts were really, which was obviously you are NBC, you're a pan-Arab broadcaster. I think, as you said, been around for 30 years, kind of hundreds of over 150 million viewers each week, I think. And I think, as we said, kind of broadcast groups are dealing with this kind of transition differently. And I think as you talked about those different segments, some people kind of come to your digital services for catch up, and that's how they come in, and then maybe they do more, or maybe that's their main focus. And in the old days, I'm going to say in the old days, I don't think you can use that expression anymore, but I can remember dealing with broadcast businesses who had massively kind of different silos that dealt with digital and dealt with traditional. And there was often significant clashes and car crashes between the two sectors, kind of fighting over who could do what. You're painting a picture of a kind of, I think, what sounds like a kind of relatively harmonious relationship, kind of you're working together with each other. You talked about working with the content people. I mean, is that relationship, I think, needs to be close? Do you have a kind of close relationship with your colleagues in broadcast?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's incredibly important for us to be able to be successful. Obviously, it doesn't mean that we don't each bat for our corner, and of course we do, but that does force us to have, very healthy conversations around what is it that we ultimately doing as a group? How do we make sure that we're supporting all areas of the business? And so by default, we have to have a strong, collaborative nature to the way that we look at all the components. And I think, we all kind of believe that there's a space for each part of the business to thrive because, the market is big. Users ultimately have their own preferences. And our responsibility is to just make sure, first and foremost, we carry a massive responsibility in terms of telling our local stories in an authentic way. That's why users trust us. They have trusted us for 30 years. That is what we're really good at. And then on the commercial side, obviously, we collaborate very strongly just to make sure that we deliver those stories in a way that is commercially sound, but that ultimately meets the user's needs.
Well, local stories kind of brings me on to the kind of the discussions. I know kind of when we met we were talking about your originals and you showed some work there, but there's quite a lot of breadth to your content offer in its totality. You have kind of your original and premium Arabic content. You have kind of, I think last time I kind of checked, you had sort of Turkish, South Korean, Bollywood, US, Latin American, but kind of presumably, because I know the investment is significant, those kind of premium Arabic kind of originals are a key pillar to the business.
They are. So from a Shahid perspective, they are incredibly important for us to differentiate ourselves as a streaming service in the market, and that is what we use the originals for. They also, the format, if you think about it, Jack, the format of an original is also they tend to be shorter series. So you're looking at, 8-10 episodes. The production quality is very strong. And then, of course, we also use these as a way to, really kind of push the envelope on certain, local stories that we want to highlight. They tend to be a bit punchier. And so the whole nature of them really allows us to bring kind of our might to these titles, not only from a storytelling and production quality, but also even from a marketing perspective, because they're so rich. And so our go-to-market can be infinitely stronger when we're working with originals. And they work incredibly well for us, particularly to kind of cut through the noise and reach audiences where we want to drive additional growth. I'll give you a great example. In February, we launched our original called Tanawiyat al-Nasim, which in English is Nasim School. It's a story about a local kind of boys boarding school, and it's, incredibly, I wouldn't say controversial because that generally has a negative connotation to it, but it's really a very interesting story. Got a ton of talkability, drove incredible subscribers for us. And again, the elements around it being a local story, it really resonated. The production quality was great. We really had a great time marketing it because there were so many angles that we could use. And so the originals really drive a lot of value for us in that sense. And they're incredibly important for us to continue to differentiate our brand and our proposition in the market.
So no imminent slowdown of that original activity.
No, I don't think so, because they are so much fun and they really make so much sense.
I guess, yeah, you watch the kind of US media landscape from afar at sort of the financial struggles and the kind of that kind of cost control narrative they've had for the whole last year, and those streamers who kind of originals are really important to them, but they're obviously having a kind of tough time balancing that cost issue and with their original output.
Listen, and the same is true for us, probably not to that extent, but it goes without saying that what I've just described in terms of our original obviously means that they come at a different price tag, but that's why we're also incredibly specific with where we invest. We don't have, tons of originals like potentially other streaming platforms that you are referring to, but we do have very targeted ones, and we use them very smartly, and we, as I mentioned earlier, we also use them to target specific audiences, and so we're quite careful with how we manage the originals. So we don't, when I say yes, we'll continue to do them, absolutely, because they're so important for us to differentiate ourselves and to drive that growth. But we do that in a very responsible manner, which I think is definitely a plus to the results that you're seeing coming out of NBC and Shahid.
Right. And I guess maybe I know your kind of your remit is pretty wide, but I'm interested in just maybe I guess the one word I'd use is innovation. I'm interested in how you might be what you might be doing with how you're innovating now with the product, and maybe that's also on the content front, but I'm also thinking kind of just generally like functionally. I know last year we saw a lot of people with kind of doing things with ad tiers, doing things with password sharing, but that was very much a kind of a US streamer driven kind of activity for a specific reason. But are there areas that you're innovating in particular at the moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have innovated a lot. When I first started, one of the first things I did was hire a really great data team. And we spent the better part of about 18 months really from the ground up rebuilding our data model, our data framework, making sure that we were collecting the right information, not only to empower decision making, but ultimately to really understand how our users behave and how we can serve them in the best way possible. I'm quite proud of the work that we've done there. I bullishly say I think we probably have the best data setup in the region, and we really, we collect something like 1 billion data points a day to really understand how to maximize the user experience to drive, the right recommendations, the right communication, the right experience. So that's by far one of our differentiators, and it's kind of the foundation. On top of that, what we've built, we've got customer support. I've got customer support under me. And so we use the combination of the quantitative information that the data gives us together with the qualitative information that we're getting from customers. And that really allows us to narrow down, when I'm looking at the product roadmap and what are we going to be doing in terms of improving the platform, that gives us really good insight as to, to be able to prioritize what are the things that we need to be fixing or innovating. In terms of innovation, the key themes that I can share that we've been looking at this year is really around, for example, the sports experience, making sure that that's rich, because of course the sports audience generally has different kind of expectations than normal entertainment audience. Obviously, continuously improving anything related to consumption of content, making it easy to navigate the platform, making it easy to provide the right recommendations. And then on the AVOD side, we have been exploring a lot in terms of improving the ad formats that we offer, innovating in terms of different ad formats, working with the advertisers in the market to identify, for example, one that we did that worked really well during Ramadan was this concept of a sponsored collection on the AVOD side. So an advertiser there was a particular kind of theme or bunch of titles that the advertiser felt really strongly about, and then they wanted to kind of sponsor that experience for the users. So we continuously trying to find these opportunities, pretty much driven by data and our understanding of what the users are telling us and what the advertisers want to see us provide for them, and then we use that as a way to kind of prioritize what innovation we continuously driving in terms of the experience, and also just commercially what are the right things for us to be focusing on.
That's great. I mean, I find it sort of the data space is fascinating because it's not like it's a new thing, but no. There are still plenty of people that I feel are not focusing enough on it. There's a missed opportunity for many. And I think maybe now with the current kind of drive to kind of use AI and kind of machine learning more, I think there's going to be even more pressure put on people to do good of it to make it work.
Of course, yes, of course.
Because the opportunity.
Actually, I forgot to mention that. I mean, we've been using large language machine models for quite a while in terms of being able to predict, like, how do we think titles are going to perform, etc. So that's a great example of how we use data in our decision making. But of course, in terms of content, I think we were also one of the first ones in the market to start using AI to do subtitling. We now do subtitling, I think, in 32 languages, if I'm not mistaken. So really trying to take our great content as wide and to as many audiences as possible. And, it's a space that I find incredibly interesting, and the team is continuously exploring and testing and figuring out how we can use all of these technologies, to drive the business as much as possible.
Great. One other thing, kind of changing slight direction. One other thing I thought was I wanted to ask you, only because I saw it pop up in the news actually, was obviously you've been driving your SVOD numbers and AVOD, but I read just about one. I think it was in a telco in Tunisia. Was it Orido? I'm not sure whether I ever say that right, but you kind of done a partnership with them, and it was interesting because those kind of business partnerships are becoming really important for the major studios and for the streamers, kind of especially in markets where they've done really well and they've got to pursue continued growth. And it's sort of the activity is growing not just in terms of the breadth of partnerships and how many they have, but also in terms of the depth of the partnership and how well, almost how significantly they might be bundled, whether it might be kind of fully bundled with sort of wholesale relationship for the SVOD. And I think if I read correctly in that deal in Tunisia, kind of the telcos customers were going to get Shahid bundle. I think with certain data bundles, they were going to have it included as part of that. Is that, and I mean, is those partnership strategies are as important to you as they are for others, I assume?
They are. So the B2B partnerships are incredibly important for us to just kind of get additional reach. And they make a whole lot of sense in markets where we're potentially not as present from a marketing perspective as we could be. And so that's where we leverage these partnerships. The partners want to obviously drive, in the case of what you're quoting, Ooredoo Tunisia, they want to drive better value for their users. They know that attaching a streamer to the data bundle drives stickiness. So that's the kind of benefit for them. For us, of course, we get to tap into their base. We get to obviously resell our product and drive revenue that way and ultimately talk to a base that we hadn't spoken to before. So we're quite selective with the partnerships that we do. However, we do have really good kind of spread across the region. And we really love to partner with a number of partners. We do actually partnerships with OEMs, with retailers, with banks, with telcos. The telcos, obviously, it's a natural kind of partnership and we have a lot of success stories in dealing with telcos across the region. And it's another way that we get to, get in front of the users and really help the telcos drive their business and, of course, drive our own as well.
Yeah. We're getting close to time, I guess, but there's perhaps there's one more thing maybe it'd be good to ask you, and I can't help but prejudice the question, which is probably something I shouldn't do. We're spending a lot of time in the fast market, the fast channel market. Obviously, it's been a kind of hugely kind of significant kind of growth area in the US. It's been growing in lots of places, but perhaps in revenue terms, kind of not being realized quite as well elsewhere as it is in the US at the moment. But certainly not insignificant in particular markets. Everyone's very focused on it, but is it still early days for fast in the MENA region?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I think it definitely is in the sense that, so we first launched, I think, in 2022, and there's been a few other streamers that have followed. What we've seen in our business is that it's taken a while to kind of to get it to really kind of stick. Not so stick, actually. To be fair, that's not the right term. So users have taken to it. What we have done over time is to really kind of refine what do we put in front of users. We've had to learn, what are the channels that make sense, what drives that stickiness, what is resonating with different audiences. And so I've always been of the opinion, even before we launched, that it was very much going to be complementary to our business. It wasn't going to, shoot the lights out. And it turns out that I've been right in that sense. It has resonated very strongly with certain audiences. And we have, been able to leverage that to drive additional advertising revenue and stickiness and retention. But I don't think that it's something that's going to kind of take over the business. And I would hazard a guess that most of, the other players who have launched it would probably say the same.
I think you're absolutely right. Kind of, the problem is looking at it in isolation. I think it fits. You can see how it fits nicely in a lot of propositions. Okay, that's quite different when you're maybe dealing with something like a Samsung TV Plus interface or a Samsung TV's interface. Actually, in certain markets where they might have to treat it slightly different. For someone like you, kind of it slips nicely into the product, but it's kind of probably never going to take over some areas, but also will work really well for certain people.
Yeah, and we see it very much complementary. There's a large portion of the base that has consumed fast. We do see variability based on what we're curating. So we know that there's certain things that work really well, like movies, etc., popular series, and also depending on the time of the year. So, for example, we launched a few fast channels for Ramadan, and those did exceptionally well, even though we had, a multitude of AVOD or of VOD assets that we made available as well. So it really is about, and this is where the importance of the data comes into play. It's really about understanding who are the audiences that are really enjoying this. When do they feel like having more of a lean back experience? That's where we curate fast a lot stronger and making sure that the right content is in front of them.
Yeah, I think we are. I think you've described kind of a space that lots of the fast stakeholders are in right now, really learning, really using the data, optimizing their channels, and kind of improving.
And actually, the point that we've gotten to, if you don't mind me adding, is that, and I also said this, I think even when we met last year, I was kind of saying, it's crazy to see the amount of fast channels that have popped up. And I was of the theory that at some point that's going to kind of, have to be narrowed down and rationalized. And we've certainly seen that in our business. So we started with a ton of channels. And again, for us, it's really about driving like a really, great sticky experience for the users and put stuff in front of them that they're actually going to really enjoy consuming. So we've really done quite a lot of work. And again, working with the data team, working with the content team, etc., to make sure that the proposition is that we're maximizing the complementary nature that the proposition has to offer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I know our research team do a lot on fast and are tracking it. I know there's a very clear message coming out of them at the moment that we are going through a period of refinement and optimization, seeing quite a few channels kind of disappear, but also quite a lot of higher quality ones come in as some of the bigger content owners are starting to kind of join in a bit more. And I think it's just going to keep going. And it's just going to be good for fast, because I think that it's going to marginalize the activity that probably, if I'm being a bit unfair, probably should have stayed on YouTube and kind of not come into fast and kind of improve the whole quality. But look, I think that's it for time probably. Thank you so much, Natasha, for coming on board, and it's great to talk to you as always. And I look forward to catch up with you sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jack, for your time. And it's a real pleasure. Always really happy to talk about the Shahid business, and look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Inside Content, the TV industry podcast brought to you by 3Vision. With decades of TV industry experience and real-world success, we know the ins and outs of the market like nobody else. To learn more about our TV consultancy services, head to 3vision.tv.